Alright, so this is a video of me doing the Jeep Adventure Academy, Indianapolis, located at the Badlands Off Road Park in Attica, Indiana. I'm having to do a voiceover because I unfortunately had some technical difficulties with the recording and I have no audio of any of this. Well, most of it. You'll see something later on. So I'm going to do my best to narrate what's going on and show you basically just how much fun this was. The Jeep Adventure Academy was designed basically for people like me who have a new off-road vehicle, a Jeep Gladiator in this case, but don't have any real experience with a whole lot of off-roading. So it's a very guided trail ride, and they have spotters at various obstacles, mainly to show you how to navigate, pick your lines, what do the buttons do in terms of locking differentials, disconnecting sway bars, all that sort of good stuff. So we're gonna get rolling, and I'll pop in from time to time to explain what's going on. Alright, so we're gonna get rolling. Let's speed up through most of this. In the first part, this is just getting onto the trail area itself. You have to pass a guard shack of sorts. If you were to come on your own, they're going to check, make sure you don't have alcohol, make sure you get your safety gear, if you're doing any sort of side-by-side kind of thing. But and then you get off into the actual trail itself. The Jeep Academy here is taking us on portions of a new Jeep Badge of Honor trail that they've laid out here at the park. So this first part is just going through forest trail, but as you see, some of the turns get pretty tight as we go, and it was interesting just to get to know how maneuverable the Gladiator is, even though it's got a long wheelbase. The ability to turn is pretty interesting to, I guess, just see how tight it can turn and maneuver. Pretty cool. And of course, it's nice to have, 3 Gladiators in front of me, so whatever they do, I do, and so long as I copy them, I'm not going to do anything terribly wrong, hopefully. And here we got the first spotter. They'll have various guys at various spots along the trail today. And he's basically just explaining, how to navigate a more difficult portion of the trail. And honestly, a lot of these, pretty much all of them, none of them are really actually difficult. It's just for the new people like us, just a couple quick pointers of how to take the next bit of the trail. Making sure that we don't hit, the side of the vehicle or the roof or anything on trees and branches and rocks and stuff. So swing wide, take it slow. We're all in 4 low throughout the whole trip, mainly just to control speed. And that was another thing that I learned, well, amongst 1,000 things, but take it slow. Allows you to maintain control and keeps you from getting in trouble. And here's another example of just some of the tight turns that you have to take. But again, you swing wide but not too wide, so you catch the tail on something, and it's easy to get through. And as we're zooming along here, we get to a point where we lose part of the group. So somehow a couple vehicles got off course and got somewhere else in the park. So we ended up having to wait a little while, and they were able to find them and get them back to the group, and then we're able to carry on. This part is really interesting because it was interesting. Well, for me, it was interesting to see the articulation of the suspension. Because we have our sway bars disconnected. So it was just cool to see how everything flexes out to follow the contour of the road. Or trail, I guess. It's pretty neat. And again, we get to see more of that flexing of the suspension and careful navigating around a lot of obstacles. And this obstacle here is just a simple downhill portion. But the spotter that they have here is showing us how to utilize the crawl mode of our Jeeps. This mode, essentially the vehicle it's basically an off-road cruise control. The vehicle handles all the gear shifting and throttle and brake application to maintain the vehicle at a constant speed. You can then use the manual mode of the automatic transmission and use that selector to control the speed in increments of 0.6 miles an hour, starting at 0.6 and all the way up to almost 5. And so I'm talking with the spotter right now, and he's just confirming that I've got all the buttons and modes and everything selected. And now the vehicle's moving under its own power. My feet are off the throttle and brake, and all I have to worry about is steering. The vehicle brakes like it might be using ABS. Again, that's just the vehicle keeping itself under control during the downhill. But the rest of the way across the flat plain is just the vehicle moving under its own power. Or I guess I should say without me doing anything. Again, other than steering. Pretty cool, a little unnerving, letting the vehicle have that much control. But the feature works as advertised. And here I thought we were crossing a creek, but lo and behold, we're actually going to drive in the creek. And this is one of the cooler parts of the trail ride for today. Haven't done something like this ever, so it's pretty fun. And I noticed the culvert in the background there in the video, and I didn't really think too much of it. Until I saw that vehicle come out. And then I knew we were going to go in it. And that's the lead vehicle that moves the spotters around the course. So the spotter's getting out and getting in position to guide us through. And I see all the vehicles going to the left of this rock, so I thought I might line myself up better if I go to the right side of the rock. And he's telling me nope. But he got me lined back up again good. And in we go. For a minute here, the camera forgets how to focus, but it'll figure itself out. And this next obstacle is simply just make it up the hill, but it's loose sand. So a little exercise in building and carrying momentum. I gave myself a little extra help and locked the rear differential for this one. that was easy enough. By now I've got the rear differential unlocked because we're back on some pavement. And now we're back to the afternoon portion of the day, going out for another trail ride. This time to tackle a different portion of the Badge of Honor trail. We didn't do the whole trail, I don't think, but it was interesting just to do some of these cool portions. This afternoon one here that we're starting out on is the more challenging in terms of, you know, the thoughts of no way we're really going to do that. As we came down the hill and we saw all the different routes to take, I didn't really feel like taking any of them, but again, the spotters aren't going to put us in any real danger of hurting the vehicle. And I'm also one of many gladiators in a row, so if they make it up, I can make it up. And once again back into the creek, this time a different portion of it. A lot more of the, medium-sized rocks. So this portion of the trail that they had us do this afternoon is more rock crawling. Basically they designed the whole day to expose you to different types of trail riding. And then they set up the trail and obstacles accordingly, just so you could kind of figure out what kind of off-roading you like and don't like. Personally, I thought this is a whole ton of fun. Trying to pick your line. Put your tire over the rock, or go around it, but avoid putting your differential into a rock. Pretty fun. Now we're all stopped because a spotter's getting out. And then Ashley and I both kind of looked at each other in shock as we saw the lead vehicle head up and off to the left at a pretty nice angle. So we knew something exciting was coming. like most video, it doesn't do it justice, but this was a big, steep rock face. And I'm talking to the spotter right now. And all we're doing is just engaging the rear differential for some better traction. Use the manual mode to keep it in first gear. And being in 4 low, that's a very slow crawl speed. And just with some steady throttle, you let the vehicle do the work. And the Gladiator just went right up it like it was nothing. I was really impressed. And they have another spotter for another smaller rock obstacle. Again, they're just making sure that you pick the correct line. So that way you're not really in danger of hurting your vehicle. But also that you pick a challenging line. So you get to feel what it's like to do some of the more challenging things. And then this spotter here is the lead for the group. And so he's just kind of talking with us as we get through it. Do a little debrief, how did we like it, etc. And I gotta tell you, that was a ton of fun. So we all made it through that portion, and did a little bit more driving and got to the next obstacle area. And so this first rock face that we're climbing up, it's not that bad. But he's telling us about the other obstacle that we're going to be doing in this little area, and letting us know that that it's optional and we don't have to do it. Which of course means it's going to be tough, challenging, and I definitely want to do it. You can see going from right to left is the lead vehicle in our group. And people without the, and there's some other people here that aren't part of our group that are just there to meet up and have fun. Again, a lot of sharing the trail. And more spotting, more rock faces, more climbing, more crawling. And yes, more fun. Of course, now we have to get down, and Ashley and I are starting to see how we're going to do that. Ashley starts thinking about ditching me, and I'm just kind of laughing at the insanity of what we're about to do. So I start to maneuver into position for my turn. And we're basically going off a very steep rock drop-off. So I've got it in first, again 4 low, and the spotter up top, I'm talking with him, and he's basically saying prepare to get on the brakes, and here we go. Look on that guy's face and the jarring of the lens. The long wheelbase of our Gladiator, we were dragging our receiver hitch on the rock face. And that's by design. All Gladiators will do that due to the very shallow departure angle. So yeah, you're gonna get some scrapes and dings, but you're dinging and scraping things that are designed to do that. And now I'm going to show you a clip with actual audio. And this is not us, but somebody else in the group.
It doesn't look as bad from here.
But you'll hear the grinding.
Oh, the drag.
And that's what it's like to go down the rock face. And here we get an opportunity to enjoy the last obstacle of the day. Just a little bit of a drop off, but enough to warrant a spotter helping us. after that, we just finish up the rest of the trail ride. Nothing too major compared to all the insanity we just did. But we'd wrap it up and start to head back to where we started for the day and wrap up the rest of the festivities of the Jeep Adventure Academy. I learned a whole lot, mainly learning the capabilities of the vehicle, surprising myself with what it and I can do, and now I look forward to getting out on the trail.